much for joining me this good morning. This morning, a very good morning to you wherever you are. Join me in the breakfast show. Remember, today is the second day of the month of May. Of course, the year is 2022, and so remember yesterday we were celebrating the Labor Day. Yesterday, the workers had their day because led by the Secretary General for Labour Secretary General, of course, Francis Atwoli. There we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta also joining the workers in celebration of their day. And so today is also a holiday, especially bearing in mind that the Labour Days were celebrated on weekend. And usually when it is on the weekend, the holidays would be pushed forward to the next day. And of course, that is Monday. And so today we are still in the moods of Labor celebration. We are still in the moods of Labor Day celebration. Join me in the breakfast show. Remember, this is the breakfast show coming to you live from Pure Africa TV, Pure Africa Radio. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Remember, in the first beat of this particular show, as usual, it will be such an interactive bit of the show. We'll get to interact. And remember, during the first bit of the show, what you'll do is to let me know where you are tuned in from, where you are watching from, of course, where you are able to view this particular show from, and of course, where you are able to follow this show from, and actually through which particular platform are you able to follow this particular show from. There are those who will be able to follow through their television screens, of course, those that are using the free-to-air satellite decoders. Again, there are those who are following one-on-one from the social media platforms, of course. Remember, all our social media platforms are already open there for you. Of course, our comment section is there. Remember, you following us through the social media platforms. Our fan page, Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram is Pure Africa TV, Twitter at Pure Africa TV. Remember, you tweeting today, this morning, hashtag is the breakfast show. And so that's what we need to do during the first bit of this particular show. We'll just be interacting there. Just to let me know where you are tuned in from. Of course, your comments, your comments, of course, I'll be shouting them out in the real time, especially during the first beat. And remember, you can as well drop your comments via our WhatsApp number. Of course, the number is 0796840560. They'll be getting your comments in real time. I'll be reading them even as we proceed with the show. Remember, you using our Pure Africa TV official app, you can as well drop your comments in our comment section. Of course, that particular application has the comment section there. You can write whatever you feel like, or whatever you feel like writing, or whatever comment you have, especially during this time that we are still in the moods of Labor Day. Of course, we saw yesterday minimum wages increased by 12%. And of course, that was an advantage to the workers. This was an increment that was made by Right Honorable President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. Of course, remember today, getting to the third bit of the show, I'll be gathering your comments, your opinions, your ideas, especially you as a worker. What is your working condition like? Do you feel it is favorable for you as a worker? Even now that we are in Labor Day celebration, do you think your working condition, your work environment, the general outlook of whatever environment or wherever environment you are working in, do you feel it is favoring you, or do you feel it is not favoring you? But why? When it is favorable, why? When it is not favorable, why do you feel so? Of course, it's your day as a worker. Of course, yesterday it has been your day as a worker, and even that is why we have the holidays tomorrow. So you'll be sharing with me when we get to the third bit of this particular show, because the breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV, Pure Africa Radio. I hope you had a very wonderful weekend. And so join me in the breakfast show. This is Monday of 2nd May 2022. We just have a lot for you. Remember, the second bit will as well get to newspaper discussions. Of course, we'll get to review some of the newspapers that we have today. Remember, we have the Star newspaper, we have the Daily Nation, we have the Standard among other. Remember, we'll also get to the top news stories, those particular stories that have been given weight, especially today during the breakfast show. We'll get there and look at those particular stories one after the other. Of course, looking at the stories that we'll be having today during the second bit of the show, I see much of the stories that are transpired during the Labor Day, of those particular stories that unfolded during the Labor Day. Remember the terms of President Uhuru Kenyatta yesterday, especially those that were being perceived to be directed to his Deputy President William Ruto. Those are some of the stories that we'll get to look at soon when we get to the second bit of this particular show. And so the show is just scheduled, everything is okay, and so join me even as we begin. This is a breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Join me and the breakfast show begins. Show live from Pure Africa TV, Pure Africa Radio. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Remember, we are in the first beat of this particular show. And the first beat, as usual, is such an interactive bit of the show where we get to interact. Of course, you need to tell me where you are tuned in from, where you are listening from, where you are watching from. Of course, where you are able to follow live this particular show. Of course, the breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV, Pure Africa Radio. Remember, during the first bit of the show, I always visit our comment sections, of course, for various platforms. I will look at the social media platforms, of course, Facebook. I will look at our Pure Africa TV official app and see whatever is transpiring there in the comment section. Of course, I'll also look at our WhatsApp number, and of course, beginning with the Facebook fan page. I see Zakaria Makuri Moseti already tuned in. Thank you very much. Saying watching live moto ya Labor Day from Ntimaru. Thank you very much, of course, for choosing the Breakfast Show, your number one Breakfast Show. Chamasi, happy Labor Day. Mr. Evans, thank you very much. Already tuned in all the way from Narok County. And there I see Philip Okoth. Philip Okoth, watching you live and clear. Thank you very much, of course, for choosing the Breakfast Show. Thank you for choosing Pure Africa TV. Thank you for choosing Pure Africa TV Breakfast Show. Remember, today, getting to the second bit of the show, we'll begin with some of the top news stories, those particular stories that are given weight, especially in the second bit of the Breakfast Show. There later we'll proceed to the newspapers. And so do not miss looking at the stories, some of the stories that we'll have to look at deeply when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we see Labor Day celebrated. Of course, this was yesterday, 1st May, of course, the year is 2022. There we saw the Labor Day celebrations were led by the Right Honorable President Uhuru Kenyatta. Of course, among other dignitaries were there. Kotu Secretary General Francis Atwoli was there. We saw the Labor Cabinet Secretary Simon Chelogoi also joining that particular celebrations, among many other workers that gathered for that particular celebration. Of course, celebrated in Nyayo Stadium. That was yesterday. Of course, we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta making his remarks during that particular time. Of course, wooing the Juakali sector for their all-time efforts. Remember, the Juakali sector of late have shown very relentless efforts in trying to push forward and make the ends meet, despite the small amount of earning that they get from that particular industry, the Juakali industry. Because they were wooed by President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, for their relentless efforts, for their hard work to make ends meet. Also, we saw those wooing those who have embraced the Kazi Mtaani initiative. Of course, those that really embrace the Kazi Mtaani initiative to make ends meet. Also getting recognition by President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, yesterday during the Labor Day celebration. Of course, those citizens also who are Kenyan workers in diaspora were not also left out during that particular time, especially during that particular time when President Uhuru Kenyatta was making his presentation as well as his remarks. Remember, these are some of the stories that we'll get to look at when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we also saw President Uhuru Kenyatta sounding warning to oil companies, that those that are selling to the neighboring countries or to the outside countries, saying that the government is now keeping an eye on them, and the government is just watching that they should oil to the outside countries, despite at the expense of selling to Kenyans. Remember, all these are, especially when it comes to the subsidies, it is as a result of the taxation of the Kenyan citizen. And so it's very sad that our oil companies, our petroleum companies, are now selling to the outside countries or to our neighboring countries. Meanwhile, the Kenyan citizens continue to suffer the shortage of fuel. Of course, President Uhuru Kenyatta said that now the government is watching, and necessary action is likely to be taken on those particular companies should they continue to do the same. Of course, the other day we saw the larger companies dealing in petrol, the bigger companies dealing in fuel, now deciding to sell to smaller companies just to ensure even distribution of fuel. across the country. Of course, that was a good move. Remember, those are some of the stories, of course, those that will be covering or will be covering deeply when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we saw also DP Ruto responding to President Kenyatta's sentiments during the Labor Day. So DP responding in a Twitter by tweeting. Remember, these are some of the stories that we'll be looking at them. Of course, during that particular time, we'll be looking at this particular story. Of course, I'll be asking you, how do you see the relationship between Deputy President and his boss, of course, President Uhuru Kenyatta? We've seen not once, not twice, during public occasions, like during the death of President Moi or during the burial of President Mwai Kibaki, he acknowledged him as his boss. Of course, not once, not twice, time and time over again, he has been acknowledging him as his boss. But what is the relationship? Do you see if they are in good terms of relationship? Because that's a question I'll be asking you when we get to that bit of the show, when we'll be tackling that particular story. Then again, over the weekend, of course, we saw the late President Mwai Kibaki finally laid to rest at his Othaya home in Nyeri County, of course, presided over by the Catholic Church. Among those that were involved were the Cardinal John Joy and, of course, Bishop Anthony Muheria. And so these are some of the stories that we'll be shortly getting to soon when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we'll begin by looking at some of the stories that transpired over the weekend. Then later we'll proceed to the top news stories. Those are given weight. Then later we'll get to the newspapers. We'll get to the newspapers to look at the newspapers, to review them deeply, and of course see some of the stories that are captured under the political section, the entertainment section, of course, a bit of the sports. I also look at that which is transpiring in the world of business. Remember, we'll also narrow down to look at the county section to see some of the stories that are transpiring from our county level, from our sub-county level, those that are coming, or those that are unfolding from even our village level. Remember, this is the destination of your choice for both local content and international content. And so you need the local plays at the right time. Remember, you need the international content. Pure Africa TV gives you. You need the international entertainment as well as local entertainment. You get it. You are just in the right time, of course, at the right place to get all the events as they come to you in the real time. And so continue staying with me. Remember, I'm taking a very short break, but coming later we'll be getting officially to the second bit of the show. Of course, we'll begin by the top news stories, those that transpired during the weekends. Then we'll look at the newspapers as we continue with the show. This is the Breakfast Show, live from Pure Africa TV. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. Coming later, I'll be of course, will be back with much more. Of course, before I take a break, I see Sir Philip also already tuned in. Thank you very much. Watching from Kisaku Secondary School, of course, Owino Victor. I see your comment already tuned in. Of course, there Emilia Tien already tuned in. Thank you very much. Madam Melody, I see already tuned in all the way from Mount Kenya University Thika campus. Thank you for choosing the Pure Africa TV. Thank you for choosing the Breakfast Show. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. Later, I'll be back with much more as we get to the second bit of the show. But today, remember, getting to the third bit of the show, I'll be asking you a question. And the question I'll be asking you is related to the Labor Day. Remember, today we are still in the most of Labor Day, considering that it was celebrated yesterday during our weekend, on our weekend. And remember, as usual, when it is celebrated over the weekends, the holiday will be pushed forward to the next day, and that is none other than Monday. And so the country is still on the moods of Labor Day. So during the third bit of the show, I'll be asking you, you as a worker, you as a laborer, how do you feel, especially considering your current place of work, considering your terms and conditions of work, and you feel they are favorable because it is your holiday today, it is your day, and you feel your working environment is conducive for you? Do you feel your terms and conditions of work are favoring you? If not, why? Remember, that's a motion that I'll be gathering your comments, considering or concerning when we get to the third bit of the show, because be ready to share with me. Remember, all our social media platforms are open. Of course, our fan page, Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram is Pure Africa TV, Twitter at Pure Africa TV, hashtag The Breakfast Show. Remember, you can as well drop your comments via our comment section, via our WhatsApp number, of course, especially those that are watching through from their television screen, those that are using the free-to-air satellite decoders. You can drop your comments via WhatsApp number, because the number is 0796840560. I'll be getting your comments the real time, of course, gathering them together and reading them when we get to that particular bit of the show. Thank you very much. This is called Sarah Mageto saying hi. Thank you very much, of course, for joining me in the Breakfast Show. Saying it's thank you. Thank you for choosing the Breakfast Show. Thank you for choosing Pure Africa TV. I'm taking a very short break. Later, I'll be getting back as we get to the second bit of the show. Meanwhile, continue staying tuned. show live from Pure Africa TV. Remember, we are officially getting to the second beat of this particular show. Remember, during the second beat, we'll begin with some of the top news stories, especially those that transpired of the weekend. Now that today that it is a Monday, we'll begin with some of the stories that transpired over the weekend. And there later, we'll be proceeding to the newspapers, of course, whereby we'll deeply review some of the newspapers that we have today in the studio. Because remember, we have the Star newspaper, we have the Daily Nation, we have the Standard. But before we get to that, let's look at some of the stories that are given a lot of emphasis, or those that are treated as the top news stories, especially. Today we'll be dwelling on the Labor Day celebration. But before we get to the Labor Day celebration, let's look at what transpired over the weekend. Of course, we saw over the weekend President Mwai Kibaki was finally laid to rest at his Othaya home, of course, in Nyeri County. We saw this particular event, or the burial services, of course, presided over by this Catholic Church, by the Catholic Church to which President Mwai Kibaki belonged to, or where his membership was, especially before he passed on. Of course, we saw among other dignitaries, or among other church leaders celebrating that, or presiding over that, we saw Cardinal John Joe, of course, also Bishop Anthony Muheria, among many other spiritual leaders, of course, who attended that particular service. Of course, we also saw political leaders also getting to that particular funeral service, especially to pay their last tributes to the late President Mwai Kibaki. Of course, all of them were led by President Uhuru Kenyatta. President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, in his remarks during that particular time, of course, we saw him regarding President Kibaki as the father of the nation, a statement that was reiterated again and again by other political leaders who also got that particular opportunity to share the podium. Of course, this particular statement we saw made by President Uhuru Kenyatta, later reiterated on by Deputy President William Ruto, and even later by ODM party leader Raila Amolo Odinga, of course, reiterating on the same statement. And so the late President Mwai Kibaki during that particular time was regarded as the father of a nation. Of course, we also saw President Uhuru Kenyatta mentioning immense contribution of President Mwai Kibaki as far as the growth of the nation is concerned. Also, according to President Uhuru Kenyatta, President Kibaki, or the late President Kibaki, immensely contributed to the growth of the Kenya's economy, and so the father of the present day Kenya. Remember, more or less the same sentiments were also mentioned, or were also reiterated on by the Deputy President Dr. William Samoei Ruto. Of course, we see we saw him saying Kibaki's economic contribution is comparable to the bottoms-up economic model. Remember, the bottoms-up economic model, of course, championed by the Deputy President William Ruto, and the UDA party saying that the Kibaki's contribution, of the late President Kibaki's contribution to the Kenyan economy is more or less the same as the bottoms-up economic model, of course, championed by the Deputy President William Ruto. Of course, also terming Kibaki as a father to the modern Kenya today. Also, Deputy President narrated his personal relationship with the late President Mwai Kibaki. He narrated his personal relationship with the late President Mwai Kibaki, of course, saying that he has interacted with the President Kiori. He had interacted with the President Mwai Kibaki severally, or on various occasions, of course. Remember, during his time as an agriculture minister, he also said that during that particular time that they were faced by a case. Both Deputy President and President Uhuru Kenyatta, they were faced by a case at The Hague. Deputy President William Ruto said that President Kibaki stood with them as a father. Also, ODM leader had the opportunity to share his views, or to share his last tributes, or to pay his last tributes to the late President Mwai Kibaki during that particular time, or during that particular day that the burial services were being presided over. Of course, we saw Raila explaining his long history of work experience with the late President Mwai Kibaki, especially especially reflecting back to the year or after the general elections for 2022, where he worked with President Mwai Kibaki, or where he worked as a Prime Minister, worked in the President Mwai Kibaki's government as a Prime Minister after the chaotic 2007 general elections. Also, Kibaki's family got the chance, or got that particular opportunity also to share their last tributes, of course led by Kibaki's son Jimmy Kibaki. Of course, we saw Jimmy Kibaki describing his father as a loving father, describing his father as a loving father, of course, who brought them up in a very desirable manner, in a very respectable manner. Of course, also mentioning that his father was a lover of education. His father was a lover of education, and so made them, brought them up in a manner that they also grew to love education. That was over the weekend. Of course, on Saturday we saw President Mwai Kibaki laid to rest. That's what transpired, of course, on that particular day. And moving forward now to the next story, of course, we see Azimio Oka in Nyeri. This was yesterday. We saw the Azimio La Umoja One Kenya coalition team camping in Nyeri for campaigns ahead of the 2022, ahead of the 9th August general election. Of course, we saw the team or the brigade led by Raila Amolo Odinga, who is the flag bearer for Azimio La Umoja One Kenya coalition, the same as ODM party leader. Of course, we saw Raila Amolo Odinga promising the people of Nyeri that he would really emphasize on the economic growth of the county, not just of the Nyeri county, but of the whole of Kenya as a country. That was yesterday during that particular time. And moving forward now to the main story, of course, transpiring there yesterday, the first day of the month of May 2022. Of course, we saw Labor Day celebrated 1st May 2022. Remember, this time that Kenya had been, remember this particular Labor Day is coming at a time that Kenya has really faced, or Kenyan workers have really faced a tough time, going by the tough economic periods. Remember earlier on we had the COVID-19, which was also a very big challenge, especially on the side of the workers. Of course, that would be acknowledged by various dignitaries that were present during that particular event. Of course, the event was led by President by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Of course, we also saw Co-to Secretary General Francis Atwoli. The same time, we saw Simon Chelogoi, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Labor. So, among many other workers, that availed themselves at Nyayo Stadium for that particular celebration. Of course, in the presentations for President Mwai Kibaki, of course, we saw him wooing the Juakali sector for their relentless efforts in pushing forward, especially. And then during that time, that country was facing tough economic time, traced back from the first wave of the coronavirus. Remember, that's when the workers began to face a very big challenge by the onset of the coronavirus. Remember, the first wave, second wave, third wave. until the time that another wave was hitting, the Omicron, when the Omicron variant was hitting. Of course, President Uhuru Kenyatta really appreciated those that are working under the Jua Kali sector for their efforts, pushing hard every time to make the ends meet, despite the unfriendly economic time, despite the tough economic times, especially occasioned by the coronavirus and as well other crises that have been seen, especially those that have been making the Kenyan economy unfriendly, especially for the workers. Of course, we also acknowledging those that embraced the Kazi Mtaani initiative, because to make the ends meet. Also recognizing the contribution of the Kenyan workers in diaspora countries. Remember, this was also mentioned by Simon Chelugui, who is the cabinet secretary for labor. And so we see that Kenyan workers in diaspora countries also contribute a lot as far as the workers' contribution is being concerned. Also, we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta sounding a very strong warning to those oil companies that are selling outside, the countries at the expense of selling to Kenyans. Remember, earlier on there had been that particular question, because looking at, or previously looking at other countries, we realized that that particular crisis of oil or fuel shortage was just in Kenya. So there was a question as to why just in Kenya, not in Tanzania, not in Uganda, not in DRC, not in Rwanda, but why just in Kenya? Of course, we saw different analysis. Of course, the economic analysts are trying to look deeply into this particular issue. Of course, saying that there was a possibility of Kenyan petroleum industries or oil companies selling to other neighboring countries, of course, because there is where they would be paid highly as compared to selling in Kenya, where they would get very little payment. That particular thing that was really opposed by President Mwai Kibaki, of course, by President Uhuru Kenyatta, sounding a warning that now the government is looking at these particular companies, and so should they continue doing that, then action will be taken against them, because remember, all those it's a contribution even of the Kenyan citizens. You as a Kenyan citizen, you as a taxpayer, remember, it's also your contribution. And so how would it feel when you cannot get when you are suffering a shortage of fuel, when the petroleum companies or the oil companies have decided to sell to outside countries where they can be luxuriously paid, or where they can be exorbitantly paid for such services. And so we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta sounding a very strong warning, of course, very bitter about that particular motion. Also, President Kenyatta showing his bitterness at leaders who incite the public when the country is faced by a crisis. For example, he gave an example of the fuel crisis in Kenya. Remember, during that particular time when Kenya previously, and even today, in some regions it has not settled to the latter. Of course, we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta sounding a warning to Kenyan leaders who have been politicizing the issue at the expense of coming together or bring their heads together to help the president get solution to that particular problem. Of course, these were being perceived to be directed to the deputy President William Ruto. Of course, perceived to be directed to the deputy President William Ruto, terming that each and every time a crisis would hit, it would be a point to campaign, of course, in various streets, in various markets, and other different places, of course, criticizing the government. that was also mentioned, of course, yesterday by President Uhuru Kenyatta during that particular time that Labor Day celebrations were being held at Nyayo Stadium. Also, we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, appreciating Raila's efforts to his government, appreciating Raila's effort to his government, also increasing the minimum wages by 12%. By 12%, of course, this is a good news to the workers. This is a good news to the workers, of course, as President Uhuru Kenyatta decided to increase the minimum wages by 12%. Of course, this was during Labor Day. Yesterday also, workers celebrated the move by President Uhuru Kenyatta, especially on the increment, on that particular increment of the minimum wages by 12% as an appreciation during this tough economic time, especially for the workers. And moving forward to the next story, of course, also related to the Labor Day celebration. Remember, today looking at the top news stories, Labor Day carries the day. Labor Day carries the day because most of the stories will be revolving around that particular day, revolving around the sentiments that were made on that particular day. Of course, this was yesterday by various leaders, of course, led by President Uhuru Kenyatta, who was also present there. Of course, we see DP Ruto response to President Uhuru Kenyatta's sentiments on Labor Day. But the President Uhuru Kenyatta's sentiments during the Labor Day, also showing his bitterness on leaders who incite the public or who incite the Kenyan citizens during a time that Kenya is facing tough economic time, or during time that Kenya is facing different crises. Drawing his example by the oil crisis or the fuel shortage crisis. Of course, it's a matter that was seen in the political arena, of course, a matter that was politicized. Yet again, of course, DP Ruto now responds to that. Of course, DP responded to that through his Twitter, or by tweeting, of course, saying that DP Ruto responded saying that the problems within the government are as a result of the president's decision to abandon him and, of course, choose some individuals to work with at the expense of his deputy president. Of course, also this is a matter that is seen to be very controversial, of course, debatable. And so I would ask you as a viewer, as a Kenyan citizen, as a voter, of course, as a taxpayer, how do you feel, or maybe looking at the relationship between Deputy President William Ruto and his boss, of course, the President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta? How do you see the relationship? Is the relationship between the two bosses dying, or do you see the relationship as close as ever before? Because that's the big question, especially relating to that particular story. Big question, the relationship between president and his deputy as now. Of course, during the Labor Day celebrations, we also saw Secretary General for KOTU, Francis Atwoli, also sharing his viewpoints. Of course, Atwoli condemns SRC, Salaries and Remuneration Commission, for involving in salary increment for workers. Of course, we saw KOTU Secretary General Francis Atwoli saying that Salaries and Remuneration Commission has no role to play. They are neither supposed to set wages and income for workers. Of course, that was a sentiment of the KOTU Secretary General Francis Atwoli. Of course, it's also Atwoli urging the government to they're also urging the government to make conducive ways, or to make it conducive for the Kenyan citizens to get to obtain NHIF cards, of course, as one way to ensure that health condition for Kenyan citizens are better, or are made better, saying that for the betterment of the health conditions for the Kenyan workers. Of course, truly saying that Azimio la Umoja One Kenya government is best suited for that particular role, which was seen or which was being perceived to be a promotion for the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition, or for Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition during that particular celebration. During that particular celebration, of course, yesterday at the Nyayo Stadium. Of course, also truly saying President Uhuru Kenyatta is worth giving advice even after his retirement or soon, as he will be leaving the office. President Uhuru Kenyatta, the countries can still depend on President Uhuru Kenyatta as a source of advice even soon, as he will be leaving the advice. Of course, those are some of the stories that are captured today during the top news stories, those that transpired over the weekends, and those that are transpired especially as far as the Labor Day is being concerned, or as far as the Labor Day was being celebrated, of course, yesterday in the Nyayo Stadium. Remember, today is also a holiday that is as a result of the Labor Day. Remember, always when such public holidays during the weekends, then it will be pushed forward to the next day. Of course, that will be Monday. So those are some of the top news stories, of course, that were captured today during this breakfast show. Of course, the first session of the second bit of this particular show. Remember, soon we are getting to the newspapers, of course, looking at various sections, at various sub-sections of these particular newspapers. Of course, remember, we'll be looking at the politics section, we'll be looking at the business section, as well as the county section, just to see those particular stories that are transpiring from our county level, from the village level, of course, from our sub-counties as well. And so do not miss that particular bit of the show, of course, scheduled just during this particular bit, of course, the second bit of the show. Remember, today getting to the third bit of the show, of course, I'll be gathering your opinions, your viewpoints, your ideas as far as the labor, as far as Kenyan workers, as far as Kenyan laborers are being concerned. Look at your working environment, you look at your work, of course, your daily activities, of course, your terms and conditions of work as a labor. As a laborer, as a worker, do you feel it is favoring you? Do you feel it is favorable? Of course, today we are still in the Labor Day, most of the Labor Day, of course. That's what you'll be sharing with me when we get to the third bit of this particular show. I'll be gathering your comments on that particular point, of course. Reading your comments even before we'll get to the end of this particular show. Of course, this is the breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV, Pure Africa Radio. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Remember to follow us in all our social media platforms. Of course, remember our fan page, Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram Pure Africa TV, YouTube is Pure Africa TV. Also, do not forget to subscribe to that particular YouTube channel. Remember, subscribing will make you be at a position of getting the latest information faster than others, or you get them as fast as they will be unfolding. Of course, all the latest trends or the latest notifications you'll be getting both for Pure Africa TV and at the same time for the Pure Africa Radio. So remember, you can just get that by subscribing. Also, remember to have your Pure Africa TV official app, simply the PATV official app. Remember that particular application is such a friendly platform where you can as well share your comments, especially during the time of the show. Remember, having that particular application will also make you be at a position of getting all the latest information from Pure Africa TV and at the same time from Pure Africa Radio. Not just that, having the Pure Africa TV official app, you will be able to follow live of course, your favorite movies and your favorite series from Pure Africa TV. And so have your Pure Africa TV official app, and having it is as easy, as simple as this. Just get to your Android smartphone there, then get to your App Store, Play Store, then type there PATV. There you'll have our Pure Africa TV official app at the first option. You want to continue staying with me? I'm taking a very short break. Remember, getting back, we will now be getting to the newspapers. And just to brief you, remember we have the Star newspaper, we have the Daily Nation, of course we have the Standard. Of these newspapers. I will be looking at them, of course reviewing them into details, just to let you know what is transpiring in the real time. Remember, this is your destination for the Pure Africa TV is the destination of your choice for both local and international content, as well as entertainment. Continue staying with me. Remember, you can as well drop your comments via WhatsApp number. The number is 0796840560. I'll be getting your comment, and of course I'll be looking at the various comment sections of our various platforms. And then as we continue, remember, you tweeting the hashtag is the breakfast show. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. There later I'll be back to review the newspapers. show live from Pure Africa TV. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Remember, we are now getting to the newspapers, of course, during the second bit of this particular show. Now we are getting to the newspapers, of course, to review the newspapers, just to see what is coming up in the world of politics, business, entertainment, of course. Also, some of the stories that will be transpiring from our various county levels. Of course, looking at the Star newspaper, looking at the front page, we see Uhuru Ruto war explodes in 99 days to polls. Of course, this can be closely related to what transpired, because yesterday during the Labor Day celebration, whereby President Uhuru Kenyatta said or really criticized those particular leaders that are taking advantage of the country's crisis during their political, during their political campaigns, to use it as a limitation, to a limitation to the current government. Of course, we saw President Uhuru Kenyatta very bitter about this. Of course, that which was being perceived to be directed to his deputy, as the deputy President William Ruto. Of course, President Uhuru Kenyatta said that instead of these particular leaders, joining him or joining their heads together with him to offer solutions at a time that the country is facing crisis, they are being seen yelling and criticizing or using it as a tool to politicize the government, especially during political campaigns, when the country is really facing a lot of crisis. Of course, also going by the response, also going by the reactions or response of the deputy president to this particular sentiment, of course, through his tweets, that has been seen to be, making the relationship between President Uhuru Kenyatta and this deputy now questionable. I remember it is now such questionable as to whether that particular relationship is bounded, or is it broken. That's a big question, of course, as far as this particular story would be concerned. Of course, here the Star brings it as Uhuru Ruto war explodes 99 days to polls. Of course, captured. Remember, this particular story, these are some of the stories that we'll be revisiting again to dig deep into them. And now moving forward to the next story, now we see Muslims to celebrate their Eid al-Fitr on Monday. Of course, this is a story that is also captured. Of course, remember, today is that particular day that the Muslims are celebrating their Eid al-Fitr, of course, holiday. That also will make the country tomorrow to have a holiday once again. Remember, Muslims across the country are today celebrating their Eid al-Fitr, according to Chief Qadi Ahmed Modar. Also, the Chief Qadi Ahmed spoke, of course, in Mombasa on Sunday evening. This was yesterday evening, saying that today, second, it will be their very special day for the celebration of Eid al-Fitr for the year 2022. Of course, the festival of Eid al-Fitr, that particular festival is an important religion holiday celebrated by the Muslims all over the world, or worldwide, that makes the end of Ramadan, this Islamic holiday, a month of fasting. And so they are having such a celebration today, also mentioned or also captured in this particular section of the newspaper. Of course, we see Obado's wife entry in woman representative race now puts pressure on allies. Obado's wife entry to woman representative race also now puts pressure on allies. Of course, we've seen the entry of Helen Obado. Of course, Helen Obado, the wife to Migori County Governor Dr. Zachary Okoth Obado, of course, as that which has been reacted to by various members of political class, of course, by various allies, of course, since she showed her interest in that particular race, targeting woman, targeting that position of woman representative for Migori County. Of course, we see the entry of Ellen Obado in the Migori woman representative race as pile pressure on two close family allies to drop their parts. Of course, Ellen is that wife of Governor Okoth Obado. Of course, on Friday we saw her, she declared that she will be on the ballot or as an independent candidate. She will be on the ballot as an independent candidate. Of course, Ellen's declarations means that three of Obado's close family allies, Lillian Akugo, of course, of Jubilee Party, and Zilpa Odin of Independent, of course, will also battle for the woman representative, for the woman representative position. And so it's that which is which is being reacted to by various members or by the close allies who also seem to be expressing their interest in that same political position, of course, for the Migori women representative position. Moving forward, we see now DP speak, I feel your pain, but you gave out my job. Deputy Ruto response to Uhuru. Remember, this was a response, or this was a reaction after the president's sentiments yesterday during the labor celebration, of course, when he really criticized, or he was really vehemently opposing those particular leaders that would be politicizing, or that would be criticizing the government as a time that the country is facing crisis, or when the country is faced by tough times, especially as far as the economy is concerned. But we see now the Deputy President William Ruto has fired back at his boss, President Uhuru Kenyatta, who has accused him of doing nothing to help. Of course, during the Labor Day declaration at the Nyayo Stadium on Sunday, Uhuru, without mentioning name, blasted at his deputy for faulting him over the rising or is not the cause. Of course, he said that some are above him, especially giving a close reference to the COVID-19. The other time we saw him giving a close reference yet again to the Russian beyond his control. But other leaders will be outside criticizing and politicizing the whole matter. Of course, during the Labor Day celebration that transpired. But now DP Ruto, in his response, of course, turned the hit back at Uhuru, saying it was him who took away his duties and gave to other people. Remember, the Cold War began when other roles were seen to be given to other cabinet secretaries. Of course, others were given. Of course, moving forward, I feel your pain. Those you assigned responsibilities and projects, Mzee, I've let you on miserably, Ruto said in a tweet. Of course, moving forward with that particular tweet, beginning of the quote, they bagged our Big Four agenda, killed our party, and wasted your second term, boss. I'm available, just a phone call away. Sadly, the last cabinet was 2 years ago. Remember, those were some of the tweets by the Deputy President, Dr. William Ruto, in response to the sentiments of President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, yesterday during the Labor celebration, of course, yesterday during the Labor Day celebration. Moving forward to the next story, now we see court orders repeat UDA Naivasha MP primaries. The court has ordered a repeat for the UDA Naivasha MP party primaries. Of course, UDA supporters in Naivasha have now welcomed the decision by the political parties tribunal to hold fresh party nominations and primaries in the constituency. Of course, the former Naivasha MP John Kiagi said the decision by the court tribunal ordering for repeat nomination is very timely. Remember, the nominations or Remember, the nominations and the party primaries have been seen to be chaotic. Of course, some of them have been seen to be, especially going by the terms of the members or the publics that are allied to those political parties, some terming them as unfree, some terming them as unfair. Of course, we've also seen in some stations the party primaries, of course, the nominations ending up to be very much chaotic. Of course, some have been accompanied by violence. Remember, in Kisumu County, Homa Bay County, Busia County, and of course, UDA party primaries for the Embu County. Of course, we saw the ballots banned. Of course, so during so the parties primaries for this time around have been accompanied by violence and a lot of complaints, of course, emanating from the members of the public who are allied to such political parties. Of course, the issue of issuance of direct tickets by party leaders, especially in ODM party, is also that which has been seen to be controversial, especially among the ODM supporters at the grassroots, those are supporting at the party level, and even some of the leaders that had showed their interest for various political seats under ODM, under the ODM party. That's also captured in this particular bit. Of course, moving forward to the next story, now we see City MCA now boasts of direct ticket bombs investing. That's a story that is also captured in this particular section. And of course, moving forward to the next story, I'll build modern Kenya from where Kibaki, Uhuru left. Those are some of the sentiments from ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga, of course, as well as the One Kenya Alliance, or as well as the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance presidential flag bearer, now saying he will build modern Kenya from where Kibaki, Uhuru left. Of course, Raila said, remember, these are some of the terms he made yesterday in Nyeri County when he was camping the campaign, or when they camped in Nyeri. August 2022 general elections. Of course, we see a day after the burial of former President Mwai Kibaki, ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga on Sunday, of course, promised Nyeri County goodies if elected to be the president. Of course, after the 9th August general elections. Of course, we see Raila Amolo Odinga accompanied by more than 10 political leaders from the region. Raila promised to use the foundation stones laid by the late President Mwai Kibaki and his assessor, President Uhuru Kenyatta, to build a modern county. Kibaki was termed the father of the present day Kenya, the father of the modern Kenya. So Raila is promising to be taking the footsteps, of course, of the late President Mwai Kibaki, then President Uhuru Kenyatta, who he terms to be his successor even before he can get there, to continue building Kenya, of course, economically, as far as the lives of the Kenyan citizens who are the voters are concerned. Remember, these are some of the promises that he made to the residents of the Nyeri County yesterday. Of course, we see from where we left with the Kibaki, and from there and build a modern sentiments of the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition flag bearer Raila Amolo Odinga. Of course, we saw Raila spent the night in Nyeri after the burial of Kibaki, and what he told the residents was in honor of the former President Mwai Kibaki, whom he worked with closely. Of course, the former Prime Minister sought to speak to the hearts of the residents, promising his administration will support farmers and small business enterprises by providing subsidies and flexible loans. just to see them and make the ends meet, especially as far as the Kenyan economy is concerned. Remember, those are some of the stories that are captured under the political section. Remember, I'm taking a very short break. Coming after, I will be getting to the business section. Continue staying with us. Remember, this is the Pure Africa TV. This is the breakfast show. You can as well drop your comments via WhatsApp number. Of course, the number is 0796840560. Our social media platforms as well. You can drop your comment in our comment section, as well as our Pure Africa TV official app. Of course, you can as well drop your comments. I'll be getting them. Then getting to the third and the last bit of this particular show, I'll be gathering all your comments, of course, going through them. Some of them I'll be reading. And today, remember, the question I'll be gathering your comments on, or the question you need to respond to, is in consideration to the Labor Day, you as a Kenyan worker, of course, you as a laborer, how do you feel? Of course, look at generally your working condition, wherever you are working. Look at the terms and conditions of work. Do you feel they are favorable? Remember, it's your day. The Kenyan workers, the Kenyan laborer, do you feel your terms and conditions of labor are favorable? Are you being favored by the terms? You as a Kenyan worker, and you see the terms and conditions of your labor, of your work are favorable. If not, why? Remember, you can share with us via our social media platforms, as well as our Pure Africa TV official app, as well as our WhatsApp number. Of course, the number is 0796840560. That's the point on which I'll be gathering your comments, of course, your viewpoints on that particular comment, especially today, that the country is still on the moods of Labor Day. Of course, your comments I'll be reading when we get to the third bit of the show. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. Coming later, we'll be getting to the business section. second bit of this particular show. Of course, this is a breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV. My name is Evans Odiamba. Now, let's switch focus to look at the business section. Of course, looking at the business section, some of the stories that are given weight. Of course, we see Kenya now seeking new wheat markets in India and Serbia. Of course, that's a story that is captured under the business section. We're seeing Kenya seeking to import wheat from India and Serbia to caution farmers, to caution customers against the high cost of wheat, flour, and to avert the looming shortage. Of course, going by the cause of this decision that has been made, going by wheat, especially for the side of the consumers, and so they see this will be a breakthrough as far as the cost of wheat is concerned. Of course, Gerald Marcela, Executive Director of the East African Grain Council, or known as EAGC, said Kenya and the East African region are currently experiencing wheat shortage because of the crisis in Russia and Ukraine. Of course, Kenya ordinarily imports over 60% of the wheat supply from Russia and Ukraine, and that's the move, or that's why Kenya is now deciding to import wheat from or to seek new wheat markets in India, and at the same time from Serbia. That's a story that is given coverage, or that has been captured and given weight under the business section. Moving forward to the next story, of course, in relation to the workers' conditions, especially during the Labor Day celebration, we now see employers want tax-free income bracket raised to 35,000 Kenya shillings. And now employers want free income bracket raised to 35,000 Kenya shillings. Remember, this is a story that is also captured under this particular bit. Of course, this particular bit of the business section. And now we see the Federation of Kenya Employers, known as FKE, and now has appealed to the government of Kenya to soften the tax regime, saying that they are struggling to sustain their wage bill. They're really struggling to sustain their wage bill. Of course, speaking during the Labor Day celebration, that was yesterday in the Nyayo Stadium, we saw the FKF Chief Executive Officer, Jacqueline Mugo, saying that a revision on the tax bracket for the low-income earners will go a long way in helping employees in maintaining the current workforce. Of course, employers now want the tax-free income bracket to be raised from 24,000 Kenya shillings to 35,000 Kenya shillings, and a tax relief bumped to 3,500 Kenya shillings from the initial 2,400 Kenya shillings. Of course, that's a plea by the Kenya workers, especially by the Kenya employers, or the Federation of Kenya Employers. That's a plea from the Kenya Federation Employers, especially to the government, as far as the working conditions, of the Kenyan workers are concerned. And moving forward to the next story, still captured under this particular bit. Of course, we see now investors now lost vote to share COVID vaccine, or to share COVID vaccine, but no how. Because this is also an interesting story to look at. This was a story to look at, of course, under this particular section. Let's look at the details of the story. Of course, we see the three of the world's biggest COVID vaccine makers have seen off attempts to make them share the know-how to make their jobs. Because a group of investors puts proposals now to the annual shareholders meetings of Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Moderna, but were not voted down. Of course, they have argued sharing their intellectual property will speed up the rollout of vaccines by boosting their manufacturing, because also captured there. To look at some of the statistics, we realize that more than 11.4 billion doses of vaccine have now been distributed worldwide, although a third of the global population has not had a single dose, according to the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, also captured in that particular bit of the show, because the business section. But now let's switch gears and look at the county section to see that which is transpiring from various counties, of course from the county level as well as from sub-counties level. But remember, I'll just remind you again on what we'll be talking about when we get to the third bit of the show, because or what I'll be gathering your opinions, viewpoints and ideas on is the terms and conditions of work. You as a Kenyan worker, you as a laborer, look at your terms and conditions of work, especially today that we are still, we are still celebrating the Labor Day. You as a laborer, you as a worker, looking at your terms and conditions of work, do you see if they are favorable? But if they are unfavorable, why do you feel it's so? You remember, you can as well share with us your comments via our comment section. Of course, I'll be getting them in the real time, gathering them together. Of course, I'll be reading some when we get to the third bit of the show. Meanwhile, you can continue tweeting as well, continue dropping your comments via our social media platforms. Our fan page is Pure Africa TV, Facebook Pure Africa TV, Instagram Pure Africa TV, YouTube as well is Pure Africa TV. I'll be gathering your comments, of course, put together and be going through some of the comments, of course, when we get to the third and the last bit of this particular show. But now let's switch gears and look at the county level to see some of the stories that have transpired, or those that have unfolded from our country or from our county level across the country. And looking at it, of course, we see Natembeya now launches a website to boost campaign. Remember, George Natembeya was initially the regional commissioner for the Rift Valley, but previously we saw him, having interest in politics. Of course, now he's using the online and digital media platforms to boost his political campaigns, of course, to clinch to that particular position. Of course, the former regional commissioner, George Natembeya, has now taken campaigns in a notch higher by launching a website to reach out to his people. Of course, Natembeya, who is the Azimio la Umoja candidate in Trans Nzoia, on Saturday, of course, said the move seeks to facilitate access to the people. Of course, through the social media platforms, through that particular website, is saying it can actually reach a large number of people, a large number of his target audiences, of course, those residents of the Trans Nzoia County, ahead of the 9th August general elections. Of course, Natembeya is eyeing the Trans Nzoia gubernatorial position. Natembeya, who is in the Azimio la Umoja's candidate in Trans Nzoia, on Saturday said the move now seeks to facilitate the access of this information to the people. Of course, I said, and I quote, the COVID-19 pandemic made technology a very critical platform in the dissemination of information. We will utilize this technology as we rally residents of Trans Nzoia to vote for us. End of the quote, George Natembeya. Of course, that's a new move. That's a new move by the former regional commissioner, George Natembeya, who has now shown his interest in the Trans Nzoia gubernatorial position or gubernatorial seat. And moving forward to the next story, now we see Nagabo breathes fire as woman representative race hots up. Of course, this is also a story that has been given weight at the county section, because the battle of the next Trans Nzoia County Women Representative seat in Trans Nzoia has intensified. Of course, we see the seat is currently held by Janet Wanyama and Mbago. Aspirants are flexing their political muscles in a bid to outwit each other come to the August 9 polls. Remember, this is a position, of course, the Trans Nzoia Women Representative position is also that which is facing tough competition. But there is also a stiff competition from various contestants that have actually shown their interest for that. Moving forward, we see even the Nairobi businesswoman Faith Katundi, main challenger, was also given nod to fly the Leopard Party ticket, because the DAP ticket has attracted the interested, or has attracted the interest of Nagabo Katundi, Susan Elema Muramba, and Esther Olenje Koli. So you realize that the Trans Nzoia women representative position is that which has a lot of contestants showing their competition. But remember, it is the fate of this particular fate is to be decided, or is to be settled by the Kenyan citizen, of course, the residents of Trans Nzoia County, who are actually the voters who will decide who gets to that political position, or who misses that political position. Now, moving forward to the next story, of course, also captured under the county section, we see now hungry Kajiado triplets and mom get food. Hungry Kajiado triplets and mom get food. That's also a story that has been captured, of course, under the county section. Of course, the Kajiado County is also captured. We see 3 underweight triplets and malnourished mom who cannot nurse them have now received help from well-wishers. Now, of course, the wife of Kajiado Central MP Elijah Kachori, Stella Kemusi, on Saturday visited the couple with the triplets at the Kajiado County Hospital, and that's good news to that particular family. Of course, Rhonda had said the hospital was only providing ugali and cooked white cabbage, which his wife could not eat. Of course, that could not be the most favorable meal for this particular mom, especially during that time, to survive with, even during that time, also with the underweight triplets, especially at the hospital. But of course, we've seen philanthropists now chip in to help under that particular situation, and of course, that's good news. And Garissa County as well is also captured under that particular section. We see now Garissa launches gender and disaster risk management policies. Garissa now launches gender and disaster risk management policies. Remember, this could be some of the steps made to counteract the insecurity and some of the violence that have been seen in Garissa County. Remember, Garissa County is that as well scared investors because of the violence, because of the insecurity in that particular region. But now we see it has launched agenda and disaster risk management policies. Of course, this is likely to improve this is likely to make the region friendly even for the investors from various regions. But now let's look at the story. Of course, we see the Garissa government has launched the Gender and Disaster Risk Management Policy. Country Secretary Abdi Ali and the WFP County Disaster Laureen Landis presided over the ceremony held at Garissa Hotel. Of course, this was yesterday on Sunday. Ali said the gender policy will ensure that the rights of women, men, boys, as well as girls are promoted, not just promoted, protected, and at the same time that all these particular groups, all these groups and gender now realize all equal opportunity and equal measure. Of course, he said the disaster risk management policy on the other side will help in preparedness, protection, prevention, recovery, provision of relief aid to victims of drought, floods, conflicts, and human and livestock epidemics. Of course, also mentioned during that particular ceremony. Remember, these are some of the stories that were given coverage. These are some of the stories that were given coverage, of course, under the county section. And the county section, of course, we've also seen the Garissa County now making a step to counteracting the disaster as well, counteracting the disaster as well as violence that has been ever realized in that particular region. But soon we are getting to the third bit of the show. Remember, today, getting to the third bit of the show, of course, I'll be gathering your comments. You as a worker. How do you feel looking at your terms and conditions of work in that particular place you're working on, in your particular workplace? How do you feel as you consider your terms and conditions of work? Are they favorable? If they are favorable, or if they are not favorable, why do you feel you are fairly treated in that particular workplace? Do you feel your rights, of course, your needs, do you feel that they are considered, of course, also in consideration to celebration of the Labor Day? You as a Kenyan labor, you as a Kenyan worker, look at your work environment, look at your work condition. Do you feel you are favored? Do you feel that particular work condition? Do you feel the particular work conditions and the terms are favoring you? If not, why do you feel it is so? But that's a motion, or that's a point on which I'll be gathering your comments. Of course, put together, I'll be reading some of the comments soon as we get to the third bit of the show. Meanwhile, keep on dropping your comments, of course. Keep tweeting. Remember, the hashtag is Breakfast Show. You can as well drop your tweets, do your comments through our WhatsApp number. You can as well drop your comments via our WhatsApp number. The number is 0796840560. I'll be getting your comments, of course, reading them during going through some of the comments during the third minutes later. Remember, you can as well drop your comment. You following through our Pure Africa TV official app. You can as well drop your comment via that particular platform, of course, in the comment section. I'll be getting your comments, putting them together and going through some of them in the third bit of the show. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. Coming later, I'll be reading to the end of the show. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Continue staying with me. A very short break later, I'll be back with much more. third bit of this particular show. Of course, this is a breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV, Pure Africa Radio. Remember, coming to the third bit of the show, I'm now reading some of these comments in our various comment section of our various platforms. Of course, I'll begin with those that have sent their comments via WhatsApp number. Later, I'll proceed to the Facebook, and then I'll finish up with those that have sent their comments via our Pure Africa TV official app. Of course, the point on which I was, or the question that I asked you there earlier, whereby you were to respond, then I get to gather your comments. Of course, I was asking you your terms and conditions, of course, as we honor the Labor Day. You as a Kenyan labor, you as a Kenyan worker. Look at your work environment, look at the terms and conditions in that particular workplace. Do you feel you are favored? If you are not, why do you feel you are not favored? Why do you feel the work terms? What do you feel should be done? Your general view as far as your work terms and conditions are being concerned. Of course, looking at some of the comments, I see Elizabeth Otieno saying we people of Juakali needed to be considered much. Of course, we saw yesterday President Uhuru Kenyatta wooing the Juakali sector, that they have really tried, despite the tough economic times. Of course, they have really tried. Those are some of the comments. Of course, let me now get to the Facebook and see other comments that are also there. Of course, Derek Okomo, watching from Kirinyaga, saying, my concern is about those who are working in private sectors. Will there be positive implications or any increase in salary? Because that's the concern of Derek Okomo, watching from Kirinyaga, especially that President Uhuru Kenyatta added the minimum wages, or increased the minimum wages by. Derek Okomo is really concerned as to whether this would benefit the private workers, or as for the private workers, they will continue with their own fight. Of course, thank you very much for your contribution. Of course, for the comments, for staying with me since we began the first bit of the show. There, we proceeded together to the second bit, and now to the third bit of the show. I would continue wishing you a day. Labor Day celebrated yesterday, but today is still a holiday in consideration to that. Continue enjoying your day, and of course continue being tuned to Pure Africa TV, of course, even for some of the shows that are coming after this. Remember to join me tomorrow again in the breakfast show at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. My name is Evans Odhiambo. Have a very wonderful day, and remember to keep safe. Bye for now.